O Lord, my Lord, how majestic is thy name throughout this earth. How majestic is your name. O Lord, my Lord, how majestic is thy name throughout this earth. How majestic is thy name. When I look at the heavens, the work of your fingers, the moon and stars which you have created, what is man that you are mindful of him? And the Son of Man, that you care for him. O Lord, my Lord, how majestic is thy name. Sing along. Throughout this earth, how majestic is thy name. O Lord, my Lord, how majestic is thy name, oh, throughout this earth. How majestic is thy name.
Hello, this is the funeral of my mother, Miriam Klempner. We've had an interesting time getting assembled today because there was a blizzard yesterday that dumped like from 6 inches of snow to a foot all over this area, but we're going to go ahead. Today is Friday. It's February 10th. Miriam passed away on Thursday, February 2nd, in her bed at Edley Village Green. And she had a long illness. She had Parkinson's disease, which progressed very, very slowly over a period of years. But toward the end, she was becoming increasingly disabled. And the big problem was, she was beginning to have difficulty eating and difficulty talking, and things were declining rapidly. But she was in no pain. And she kind of knew that the end was coming, and she died peacefully, and I was near for most of that day. And so while I'm sad, we kind of knew it was time. I prepared some remarks here about her life, and I'd like to tell you about that now. Now, my mom, Miriam, had many difficulties in her life, but she always was an idealist. She always had a dream. She grew up during the Depression in Queens, New York. Her parents were immigrants. They worked in the garment district when they first came over. And then later during the Depression, her father got laid off. He was a manual stern. He managed to buy a little candy store with borrowed money, and the family lived above the candy store and just worked 24 hours a day. And they lived in a German neighborhood, so it was kind of hard because they were the only Jews in that neighborhood. And that's how Mom grew up. But the one thing my mom had going for her was that she was very bright and she was a good student. And at that time, her heroine was Marie Curie. And she wanted to grow up to become a scientist and to change the world. So she graduated from Grover Cleveland High School with an award in science, and then she went on to Queens College, where she got a degree in chemistry, class of 47. And that was a really remarkable achievement for a woman at that time. So then she went to work as a laboratory technician, but that was kind of far from what she had dreamed of, because she wasn't changing the world, and instead she was doing things like taking blood samples, blood contributions from bums who needed some money, and that was a little disappointing. So after a while, she went back to school to get certified as a teacher, and she earned a master's in teacher education. Somewhere along the line, she met my father, Irving Klempner, who was a Polish immigrant. I believe he had gotten his citizenship by that time. I believe he had been in service during World War II and was out, and now was trying to get a college degree. And they met, she said, at a fireman's dance or some kind of local dance. And in the end, they got married. And he needed to finish up his schooling, so she helped put him through college. By 1952, she was teaching at the Sarah Hale Vocational High School in Brooklyn. When he graduated, he got a job, and I believe it was an internship at the Library of Congress, because he wanted to study information technology and library science. So they moved to Washington, D.C. And there is where she had her two children, myself, and then my brother Mark. They didn't stay in Washington for more than 4 or 5 years, and then returned to New York. My father, I think, worked at the Brooklyn Navy Yard for a while, and then he got a job working for the United Nuclear Corporation, so they moved to the Bronx, and that's where we grew up. And he went to night school all the time we were going to elementary school. And he got his master's and his PhD. And in 1967, he got a job as a professor at SUNY Albany, and so we all moved up to the Capital District. Now, when we moved here, I was in high school, Mark was junior high school, and as we got up and out, Miriam wanted to go back to work, and she started teaching at Iroquois School, but there was a laboratory accident that was traumatic for her, and that cut her career short. And even though she recovered physically from that accident, she was emotionally traumatized, and she had lost the hope that science would solve the world's problems. So from then on, Miriam changed her focus from the material to the spiritual. Her new hero became Mother Teresa. She immersed herself in religion and ritual, and she did a lot of experimentation. She consulted psychics and tried meditation. She was a member of Temple Gates of Heaven and explored the spirituality there and other forms of Judaism, like Chabad, and also other faiths, attending ceremonies at the Methodist churches and the Catholic churches. But always, she reached out to God and sought his blessing and his guidance. She felt a deep compassion for the unfortunate, and she lived by those ideals. She donated generously to many charities, especially ones that help children. She volunteered her time. She tutored kids in the poorer neighborhoods of the city. She visited the disabled elderly. She cooked in soup kitchens. She gave to Jewish and Christian causes alike, as well as political ones, as well as to help preserve the environment, as well as to help protect animals. She wanted to save the world. In her personal life, Miriam built a beautiful rock garden and stocked her yard with bird feeders and adopted various pets. And she loved art, both as a collector and as a creator. And when Irving passed away in 2004, and she was on her own, and then she became increasingly ill. So for a period of time, she moved to be with my brother Mark in Costa Rica, but then she moved back here, and that's where she went into assisted living at Brookdale. And from that point on, art became kind of like a passion for her. She made portraits of fellow residents. She drew flowers and birds and animals and landscapes, and she also drew religious symbols, stars, crosses, hearts, candles. She drew figures out of the Bible and others from fairy tales, and she completely covered the walls of her apartment with beauty. And I've brought some of her pictures today to adorn the ceremony in her memory. They speak for her spirit more clearly than I could. In these last few months, Miriam knew the end was coming. As her body grew weaker, she accepted and even welcomed the transition to the next world. She told me God spoke to her. She told me a place was waiting for her in heaven. And no doubt she is there now, looking down on us. Thank you.
Thank you, Diane. I'm Mark, son of Miriam. I'm going to just start with a little bit of Jewish ritual. This is my father's old tallis, which I'm going to put on. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kiddushanu b'mitzvot tzivanu al mitzvot tzitzit. And in the Jewish tradition recognizes that despite the belief in the afterlife and the faith that our loved ones do live on and that souls are eternal, only the body is gone. But it's like they're behind a screen and we can't see them and they can see us. Therefore, it's our loss. There's something that's been rent in the fabric of our life that cannot be restored in this physical reality. So it's a Jewish tradition to cut the garment as a symbol of this rent in the fabric. So I'm going to do that now. And I'm also going to recite the traditional prayer, which in Judaism is a very interesting prayer. It's one of the most recited prayers in the service, but it's a prayer for mourners, but it's not a prayer about anything sad. It affirms that all is well in God's universe and that ultimately everything is just as it needs to be and perfect in its own way. So the prayer goes, Yitkadal v'yitkadash shemei rabbah b'yalma divro chirusei v'yamlich malchusei b'chayachon uv'amechon uv'chayei de kol beit Yisrael b'agala v'zman kariv v'yamru amen. Yehei shlama rabba mivarach li'olam omei omaya. Yitbarach v'yishtabach v'yitpa'ar v'yitraman v'yitnasei v'yithadar v'yithalei v'yithalal shmei de kodesha b'rechu la'ela min kol b'chirata v'shirata tush b'chata v'nechamata Amiran bi'alma v'yamru amen. Al Yisrael v'al Rabbanon v'al Talmidachon v'al kol Talmidei Samidechon v'al kol de oki barchso divasro chodayan v'dich v'chol aser v'asar L'chai, L'chon, L'chon, Shlomo, Rabba, Hino, V'chisto, V'rachamim, V'chayin, Arichin, Uzman Ne, Reveche, Uporchonamin, Kadon, Uvrachdon, Dish, B'chameo, V'raro, V'yamrav, Amen. Yehe Shalama Rabba Mishamayu V'chayin Tovin Aleinu V'yakal Yisrael V'yamru Amen. Oseh Shalom B'mramav Hu Yaseh Shalom Aleinu V'yakal Yisrael V'yamru Amen. That prayer is in Aramaic, and as I said, it's a very positive prayer. The translation is, exalted and hallowed be his great name throughout the world which he created according to his will. May he establish his kingship, bring forth his redemption, hasten the coming of the Mashiach in our lifetime, in the days and in the lifetime in the entire house of Israel, speedily and soon, and say Amen. May his great name be blessed forever and ever, for all eternity. Blessed and praised, glorified, exalted, extolled, honored, adored, and lauded be the name of the Holy One. Blessed be he, is beyond all the blessings, hymns, praises, and consolations that are uttered in the world, and say Amen. Upon Israel, upon our sages, upon their disciples, upon all the disciples of their disciples, upon all those who occupy themselves with the Torah or in any other place, upon them and upon you, may there be abundant peace, grace, kindness, compassion, long life, ample sustenance, deliverance from their Father in heaven, and say Amen. May there be abundant peace from heaven and a good life for us and for all Israel, and say Amen. May he who makes peace in the heavens make peace for us and for all Israel, and say Amen. So, I'm going to share a few stories about Miriam. I'm going to go way back to when I was a teenager. I grew up in the 60s, and as you all know, that was a turbulent time. And I was a budding folk singer, musician type, and I was very much immersed in the movement, social change, and all of that. So I was determined to go off at the end of my junior year in high school, and I just wanted to go off and play music with my guitar. So I moved to Boston at the age of 16, and my mother drove me to Boston. And I was determined to be independent and just start this new life of mine. And we were sitting on a little stone wall in Central Square and saying goodbye. At that time, of course, I had no idea what it's like for a mother to say goodbye to her 16-year-old son and send him off into the world. So we said goodbye, and as I was walking away down Massachusetts Avenue, I heard her voice, and I turned around, and she had her hands up like this, like she was the high priest in the temple. And she was pointing her hands to me like this. And she said, "May the Lord bless you and keep you. May the Lord," "May the Lord shine his countenance upon you and be gracious unto you. May the Lord turn his countenance toward you and grant you peace." So I stopped in my tracks as she was sending me this priestly blessing as I was walking away. And I didn't fully appreciate what she was doing at the time, but now I do. I thought it was a really wonderful thing to have done. Later, I was living in Ithaca, New York, and there was a sort of a spiritual community in the woods there, pretty way out, that had this guru who naturally was Jewish. He later moved to Israel and became an Orthodox Jew. But at the time he was there, and this community had little yurts they lived in, which are like little teepees with wood stoves in the center, very cozy, holding only one person or two people at the most in these little yurts. So I was living there And my mother wanted to visit me, and I said, Mom, I'm living in this hippie commune. I don't know if it would be really your thing. She said, never mind, I just want to come. So she showed up in West Danby, New York, and everybody welcomed her, and they gave her her own little yurt to live in. And by the time she left there, they were all calling her Sweet Miriam, and they had totally accepted her into their community, and the guru there had given her a gift, and everybody loved her there. So she showed that she was a very adaptable, very open-minded person. And I think by now you might have noticed that she's not a judgmental person. And that's the main thing I want to say, is that throughout everything that I went through, she never cast me out. She never condemned me. She just kept on loving me. And there were times in my rebelliousness when I was embarrassed to be with her. There's a joke that says, teenagers buying some clothes in the store says, if my parents like it, can I return them? So I was, in certain spaces at certain times in my life when I was certainly, in fact, even that day when she dropped me off at Boston, she wanted to go out to lunch, and I thought, I don't want to go to lunch with my mother. Like, if Bob Dylan came to town to start his new life, he wouldn't have brought his Jewish mother with him, and going out to lunch with her. So I was, being a foolish teenager, and she just rolled with it, always. She just kept on giving love. She kept on giving unconditional love. Whether I was in a good mood or a bad mood, whether I was rejecting her, whatever I was going through, she just kept on loving me. And this went on for a very long time. And then at a certain point, well, I had matured, of course, but at a certain point, I was just like, okay, you win. I love you, you love me. Done. And from that point on, there was this beautiful flow of love between us, and there's like the mother-son bond was just there and so strong. And it just never wavered after that. There were no more issues. When my father died, my mother did something remarkable, I think. My father, having survived the Holocaust, having been on the last boat out of Poland on August 25th, 1939, while he was on the ocean, Hitler invaded Poland, and all the relatives, except for one or two, were killed, who had been left behind. Naturally, my father had some issues with material security. So he was a real hoarder and spendthrift. Is that the word, spendthrift, when you don't want to spend money?
No, miser.
Okay, miser, we would have to say. But he had his reasons. So when he passed away, he had amassed quite a large sum of money because he had deprived himself of so many things in order to have this security of knowing there was money in the bank. And my mother, one of the first things she did after he passed away was she gave 10% of the entire estate to charity. She gave to the Salvation Army, she gave to Jewish organizations, she gave to various organizations, and it amounted to hundreds of thousands of dollars. And she did it without hesitation because she felt it was the right thing to do. And that was it. She continued to be very generous to the point that me and my sister had to sort of rein her in, because every time she got a letter in the mail that said there were like Native American children who needed help for their schooling, she would be writing a check. And once you start writing these checks, you get more and more of these solicitations. So she would be getting dozens of solicitations, and she would be writing dozens of checks. So my sister and I had to say, Mom, the Bible says 10%, don't go overboard. So we reined her in. But she still gave generously every year. Just a couple of weeks before she passed away, I was doing my prayers on my third floor patio of my apartment building. I have a nice patio on the third floor. It looks out on the mountains of Costa Rica. I like to pray out there. I brought my cell phone out there because I just wanted to see the time so I'd know when to go to synagogue. And then the phone rang, and I saw it was my mother calling. She didn't call that often because it was a physical strain for her to call. She didn't have that much energy anymore. And I wouldn't normally answer the phone on Shabbat, but as my mother calling, I felt like I have to talk to her. That comes first. So I answered the phone, and we had this 40-minute conversation that was very, very slow, but very, very beautiful. So I was treating it almost like a prayer that my mother wants to say things to me, so not rushing her. She took a long time, sometimes they're long pauses, but we had this beautiful back and forth. And I know we said, I love you at the end. I think the thought flitted through my mind, this might be our last conversation, because whenever she called, I never knew if it was going to be our last conversation. When someone's 90 years old, you can't take anything for granted. So we had this wonderful conversation, and she told me, she asked about my children, Michaela and David, and she was wishing the best for us all, and I told her I loved her. She told me she loved me. And then she had certain quotes that she loved to go back to, and she dwelled on. She was very fixated on certain quotations. So I think she might have ended, or at least during the conversation at some point, she pulled out one of her favorite quotes. And she loved to say this. She would say, from Shakespeare, from Hamlet, I believe, or Macbeth, it's, "This above all, to thy own self be true, and it must follow as night the day, thou canst not be false to any man." That was one of her very favorite quotes. To thine own self be true. It must follow as night the day, thou canst not be false to any man. So I listened to that quote, took it in, very profound quote, words to live by for sure. God knows, as we see how many temptations there are to be inauthentic, not be true to ourselves. And I think she always had that teaching in her, and I think that's why I feel I've been more or less true to myself, and I don't have the problem of people who feel like they went off the track and lost touch with who they really are and what they really wanted to do in life, and my sister as well. So I think we have her to thank for that. So these are just some reminiscences. There are many more, but these give you an idea of what my mother is like. She was always generous and never discriminated. In these days where people are making a big division between us and them, she never did that. She would have like a maid would come in, might be African American, might be a different religion. It didn't matter to her. She was always kind. She was always good to whoever was in her life, and never thinking that, well, I care about this person because they're in my tribe, and this other person, they're not in my tribe, so I don't care about them so much. For her, people were people, and you had to help them and be good to them. So I'd like to just conclude. I'm going to mention one announcement, and then I'll conclude with one of the Psalms. She loved the Psalms. The announcement is that there's a very wonderful rabbi in Brooklyn named Simone Jacobson, and he gives several podcasts each week that appear on iTunes and on YouTube. And my family has sponsored the upcoming podcast in memory of Miriam. So if you would like to tune in, it's going to be next Wednesday at 8 p.m. GMT, but it will also be on YouTube, so you can watch it anytime. It's first live, and then it goes onto YouTube or iTunes. So it's Simone Jacobson, the Meaningful Life Center. He has his global podcasts, and I hope you'll tune into it and listen to it, either live or at some later date. Okay, finally, Psalms. I'd like to do 2 Psalms. I know my mother was really fond of both of them. And she also loved music, and she loved for me to sing to her. I didn't have a guitar I could bring today, but I'll sing one of them and I'll read one of them. This one I had read to her several times, and she really loved it. It's Psalm 27. The Lord is my light and my salvation. Whom shall I fear? The Lord is the strength of my life. Whom shall I dread? When evildoers approached me to devour my flesh, my oppressors and foes, they stumbled and fell. If an army were to beleaguer me, my heart would not fear. If war were to arise against me, in this I trust. One thing I have asked of the Lord, this I seek, that I may dwell in the house of the Lord all the days of my life, to behold the pleasantness of the Lord, and to visit in his sanctuary. For he will hide me in the tabernacle on a day of adversity. He will conceal me in the hidden places of his tent. He will lift me upon a rock, and then my head will be raised above my enemies around me, and I will offer in the tabernacle sacrifices of jubilation. I will sing and chant to the Lord. Lord, hear my voice as I call. Be gracious to me and answer me. In your behalf, my heart says, seek my countenance. Your countenance, Lord, I do seek. Do not conceal your countenance from me. Do not cast aside your servant in wrath. You have been my help. Do not abandon me nor forsake me, God of my deliverance. Though my father and mother have forsaken me, the Lord has taken me in. Lord, teach me your way and lead me in the path of righteousness because of my watchful enemies. Do not give me over to the will of my oppressors, for there have risen against me false witnesses, and they speak evil. They would have crushed me had I not believed that I would see the goodness of the Lord in the land of the living. Hope in the Lord, be strong. Let your heart be valiant. Hope in the Lord.
At this point, I'd like to have us take a closer look at some of Miriam's pictures. Okay, so I brought a bunch of Miriam's pictures with me today, and if I move it out here and hold it like that, would that make it easier? Okay. So during the years, Miriam always loved art. And when she was younger and when she was still teaching and raising a family, it was more of a hobby. She would take courses on the weekends in flower arranging and jewelry making and oil painting. And also because my father was a big collector and he loved to go all over the country and go to flea markets and find treasures, she started her collections, and she collected dolls and certain types of pictures and certain other things. But when she got more disabled, when she got more ill and had to move into assisted living, then she really focused in on the art. And it sort of made up for a lot of the things that she had loved, like she had used to love her garden, and she used to spend a lot of time in her garden. But the time came when she was not physically strong enough to walk in the dirt and get down and get up and dig. So then she focused all of her energy into the art. So a lot of these pictures are from that earlier period when she was maybe still walking with a walker and had some mobility, but she was missing the garden. So you can see, like in this picture, she's drawing a pond with all of the types of little animals that you might find in the wild. There are birds, there's a turtle there, there are rabbits, they're all coming out, sitting in the trees. When she was first starting the art, she was a little unsteady with it. You know, she had not really done it a lot. So she began by using models, either famous paintings or sometimes greeting cards or things she found in books as her models, and she would be mostly copying. So this is an example of that. There was an artwork by some, I believe, Mexican painter with a sun and a sort of Aztec type images on it. And she did her own version. She never copied exactly. She would use it as an inspiration. And if she didn't know how to draw something, she would figure it out from looking at the picture, but then she would always add her own elements. So now this, I'm not sure who this is, but this woman has her tongue out. And that was one of my mother's favorite expressions of derision. She did this quite a lot. I have several photographs, one in which she's sticking her tongue out at me at a Dunkin' Donuts. And sometimes she would do it to other residents in the nursing home. So I'm not sure who this woman is or who she's sticking her tongue out at, but this was very Miriam. Okay, this one, if I look at this picture, it's got a cardinal in it, and I'll note that we always had a family of cardinals in our backyard, and it's got some beautiful flowers in it, but you see it has dark blue and a lot of turbulence in the back, and it's labeled a hurricane. So this one is a sunflower. And sunflowers was one of her favorite motifs. And I have like about half a dozen sunflower pictures hung all over the house. And she did lots. She did lots. So she loved sunflowers. And this one says Cinderella. And you can see there's a woman in a bed with a big coverlet over her. And I think that has several meanings, because while my mother liked fairy tales, she raised us. One of the key memories from my childhood is going through Alice in Wonderland that she would read to us, and then we would act out all the parts. We had these little Alice in Wonderland figurines, and we would play act with them and act all the parts. And she also liked the story of Cinderella and several others. So I'm wondering with that one, it's Cinderella, but it's a woman in a bed, so maybe it's confused with Sleeping Beauty, and the way the room looks is almost like my mother's apartment at Brookdale. So maybe she's thinking, in some ways that may be a self-portrait of being in bed and not being able to be very mobile. Okay, I'm going to get these pictures down now. Now, as they say, my mom drew other people, and she also liked to display her artwork. At Brookdale, they had a little weekly art class where people would come, and she loved to go to that, and she loved to show off what she was doing and to see what the other people were doing. And occasionally, she would decide it was time for an art show. And she would invite everybody up to her room to see all the stuff she had posted all over her walls and offer snacks. And this says welcome, and that's the kind of poster she would put up when she was inviting people into her room when she was going to have an art show. And this one is a cat and a dog touching noses, and it says friends. And again, she always had a cat, except when we were in places when we couldn't have cats, and then she had hamsters. And then when she got into Brookdale, she couldn't even have a hamster, so she had a fish. So she always had something, a little friend with her. Now this one is a zebra, and a butterfly, and a bird. And I'm gonna guess that she probably copied that off a calendar. Probably an ASPCA calendar, because she gave to them a lot. And here's another one with animals. This one says, it's hard to see, but there's 3 dogs in a row, and they're all done in very dense black ink. And it says, a rainy afternoon in Dogland. And what exactly that means, I don't know. Now this one appears to be one of the things my mother did was collect toys, and she had an extremely nice selection of Japanese or Chinese dolls in kimonos, and that sure looks like a picture of one of her dolls. And on this one here again, we have the more typical theme. A sunny sky and 2 cardinals on a branch. Again, the kind of thing that you would see out her backyard window when she lived at the house. And now I'm going to get the final set of pictures. Now these were pictures she mostly did during this last year when she was getting really ill and things were getting really difficult. She had to move from Brookdale into a nursing home. It was getting, before she had trouble walking, but then she couldn't walk at all. She needed to go into a wheelchair. She was having trouble eating. She was having trouble speaking. Life was getting tough. And I think she knew what was coming. Now on this one, she started drawing a lot of religious themes at this time. And when she moved to the nursing home, she had me bring her some little electric candles, because they were not allowed to have flames, obviously, in a place with so many disabled people. But she had these 2 little electric candles, and she put them by her window, and she kept them on practically all the time. And she would say prayers over and over and over again. Because a lot of the time she couldn't remember what day it was, so just in case she would say Sabbath prayers, like every day. So this one has the prayer that my brother said she said to him when he left.
May the Lord bless you and keep you. May the Lord shine his countenance upon you and be gracious unto you. May the Lord turn his countenance toward you and grant you peace.
And the Sabbath lights and the Jewish star and the wine glass. This, I believe, is a portrait of one of the women at the Eddy Village Green Nursing Home. Or maybe it was Brookdale, I'm not certain. But it is a portrait. And over these years, she went from being kind of clumsy to getting to be such a precise artist that she could draw a face and it would be recognizable. And this one definitely has character. You can see it's a specific person, not just anyone. And she found that she got popular in these places by drawing other people's pictures and then giving them the portraits. They enjoyed that a lot. This one, I'm not quite sure about that, but it's got a great big, it's either a sunflower or a sun or both, and a person carrying it. And now as she got more ill and more confused, she started drawing pictures that were a lot more dense and a lot more dark. So for instance, this one, as you can see, there's a lot of like very, very fine scribbling, and the whole color is dark. And I think that was sort of characteristic of when she was, feeling ill. And then that craze came in with everybody getting adult coloring books. And she had one with mandalas. On this one, I believe I was the one who drew the mandala on that page. But then she colored it in, and she added her own touches to it, of the sun, and whatever this red thing is, and it looks like a little person falling into the sun, or being drawn up into the sun. And this one has a similar theme, because I wonder, it's a lot plainer. Sometimes she would recruit other people, her other residents, her nurses, her aides, to collaborate on pictures. So just like I drew the mandala for that, I believe somebody may have collaborated on this one. But it's this starry night with a moon above and the clouds. And there's a little temple with, I believe it's Jewish lettering on it, and there's a little cross, and there's a little stars, and it's all going up to the sky, going up to heaven. So this is the kind of work that Miriam did during the last 10 years before she passed. Thank you.
O God, full of compassion, who dwells on high, grant true rest upon the wings of the Shekhinah in the exalted spheres of the holy and pure, who shine as the resplendence of the firmament, to the soul of Miriam Bat Sylvia, who has gone to her supernal world. For charity has been donated in remembrance of her soul. May her place of rest be in Gan Eden. Therefore, may the All-Merciful One shelter her with the cover of his wings forever, and bind her soul in the bond of life. The Lord is her heritage. May she rest in her dwelling place in peace. And let us say, Amen. The birds of the heavens and the fish of the sea, and whatever passes along the paths of the sea. O Lord, my Lord, how majestic is thy name throughout the earth. How majestic is thy name.